All right, so today we're diving into some pretty uncharted waters.
Oh,
We're talking about the West Philippine Sea, trying to figure out, like, which islands actually belong to the Philippines.
okay.
You might be surprised to know it's not as simple as just looking at a map.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of history involved, legal back and forth, even some pretty old maps that we have to look at.
And that's why we're going deep today.
Deep dive.
Yeah. With excerpts from lectures by retired Supreme Court Justice Antonio Carpio.
He's the expert.
He really gets into the nitty-gritty of this whole territorial puzzle.
Yeah.
Our mission today is to not just learn a list of island names, but to understand why the Philippines' claim is so strong, even though other countries say they own them too.
Exactly. And this is where things get really interesting because a lot of people think that the Philippines claim is kind of shaky. But when you dig into the history and the law, it's actually a lot more solid than you might think.
Okay, so before we get into like maps and treaties and all that, let's back up a bit.
Okay.
Why does it even matter who owns these islands? Like they're scattered across the West Philippine Sea.
Right.
Some of them are tiny, some are basically just rocks.
Right. Well, think of it this way. These islands, they're kind of like stepping stones, to control over huge areas of ocean. And those areas, they come with resources.
Oh.
Fishing rights, potential oil and gas,
Wow.
shipping routes, so the stakes are pretty high.
Okay, so it's not just about bragging rights then.
No.
But I'm still a little confused about like the legal stuff.
Okay.
What's the difference between a maritime dispute and a territorial dispute?
So maritime disputes are about things like how far out a country's fishing rights or drilling rights extend.
Okay.
Those are mostly settled for the Philippines.
Okay.
But territorial disputes, those are about who actually owns a piece of land.
Uh-huh.
And those can get pretty messy.
I bet.
Yeah.
Especially when you have multiple countries saying, hey, that's mine.
Right, exactly, yeah.
So how do you even begin to untangle that?
Well, international law has this concept of a critical date.
A critical date.
In this case, it's 1947.
Okay.
And basically, anything a country did after that date to try and strengthen their claim, like building something on the island or sending people to live there,
Yeah.
it doesn't really count.
Wait, seriously?
Yeah.
So it's like a time freeze. Why 1947, though?
It's about trying to prevent countries from, making things worse.
Yep.
Once a dispute is out in the open,
Yeah.
think of it as hitting the pause button so everyone can just chill out and figure things out peacefully.
That actually makes a lot of sense. So it all comes down to what was happening before 1947.
Right.
But earlier, I mentioned that some people think the Philippines' claim is weak.
Yeah.
Something about Presidential Decree 1596.
Ah, yes.
What's the deal with that?
Okay. So that decree was basically the Philippines' first attempt to formally, lay claim to these islands.
Right.
But the arguments they use, like, hey, these islands are close to us or we need them for security,
Yeah.
those don't really hold up in international courts.
So proximity isn't enough.
It's not enough, no.
What does hold up then?
Right.
What are the big guns when it comes to proving you own an island?
Historical ownership is key.
Okay.
And continuous claims.
Right.
And that's where this principle of uti possideus juris comes in.
Uti possidetis juris.
It's a mouthful, I know.
It is.
But it basically means that the borders of former colonies should be respected.
Okay, so how does that help the Philippines?
Well, instead of the Philippines having to prove they own these islands,
Right.
other countries now have to prove they took rightful ownership from the Philippines sometime in the past.
Gotcha.
It shifts the burden of proof.
So it's like proving you didn't steal something versus proving you do own it.
It's a big difference.
Yeah. And here's where it gets really exciting. Because the Philippines has something that could really tip the scales in their favor.
Oh.
An old Spanish map from 1875
Yeah.
called the Carta General del Archipelago Filipino.
I've heard about this map.
Yeah.
It's super detailed. Real.
Super detailed. Names, depths, the whole shebang.
Yeah.
Created by the Spanish government.
Wow.
And it meticulously lists and outlines the islands that make up the Philippines,
Right.
including the ones in the Spratlys.
Okay.
And what makes it even more powerful is that no other country has a map, from that era showing that same level of detail and claiming ownership over those islands.
Okay, now I'm really interested. So let's open up this map and
Okay.
see what's inside. What are some of the specific islands it shows?
Well, for example, there's Pagasa Island.
Okay.
The map calls it Theo.
Theo.
And then there's Kota Island, listed as Loa.
Loa.
And of course, there's Itu Aba.
The biggest one?
Right.
Marked as Leo.
Hold on, those names sound really familiar.
Yeah.
Aren't those the islands being disputed right now?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Seeing those modern names linked to their, historical counterparts
Yeah.
really drives home how long the Philippines has considered these islands part of their territory.
Wow. I never knew that.
Yeah,
Didn't Justice Carpio also mention something about Scarborough Shoal?
he did.
Something about a Spanish explorer, Malaspina?
Yeah, yeah.
That sounded pretty cool.
So it turns out that in 1792, Alessandro Malaspina,
Okay.
Spain's answer to Captain Cook, basically, conducted the first ever survey of Scarborough Shoal. And they even included it on, later map.
So Spain was out there mapping and surveying like centuries ago.
Yeah.
But how strong is all of this,
Yeah.
legally?
Right.
I mean, we've got maps from the 1600s showing these islands as part of the Philippines.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody else was claiming them back then.
Right.
So legally speaking, where do we stand?
It's incredibly strong. Okay.
Especially when you look at legal precedents like the island of Palmas
Right.
and Clipperton Island cases.
Yeah.
International courts have ruled that when it comes to uninhabited or, hard to reach territory,
Okay.
the first country to claim it
Right.
and document it
Mm-hmm.
effectively owns it,
Okay.
especially if there are no other claims at the time.
So the Philippines basically called dibs and backed it up with maps and documentation.
Pretty much,
Wow.
but it gets even more interesting.
Oh.
Remember the Treaty of Paris?
The one that handed the Philippines over to the U.S.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, guess what?
What?
It had a map, and it included the Spratlys.
Wait, are you serious?
Yeah.
So the U.S. got the Spratlys when they got the Philippines?
That was the intention, yes.
Wow.
But there was a little snag.
Oh.
The way the treaty described the boundaries
Yeah.
created some confusion,
Oh.
especially over islands like Cagayan de Sulu.
So some islands fell into a gray area. Exactly. Yeah, and there were even disagreements with Spain about which islands were actually included.
So how did they clear up that confusion? I mean, were there fist fights over maps?
Thankfully, no fistfights.
Okay.
They signed another treaty,
Okay.
the Treaty of Washington in 1900.
Okay.
And this one cleared up any confusion
Okay.
and specifically stated that the U.S. got all the islands belonging to the Philippines,
Okay.
both inside and outside those disputed lines.
So no more gray areas.
No more gray areas.
The Spratlys belong to the U.S. as part of the Philippines.
Precisely. And this treaty becomes yet another layer in the Philippines' legal case,
Okay.
further solidifying their claim.
Okay, I'm seeing a pattern here.
Yeah.
Lots of historical agreements backing up the Philippines.
Right.
But hold on a sec. You mentioned the UK and Malaysia earlier.
Right.
What did they have to do with all this?
Well, in 1930,
Okay.
the UK,
Yeah.
and by extension Malaysia, signed a treaty with the U.S. that acknowledged the Philippines' ownership of all these islands,
Wow.
including the Spratlys.
So even back then,
Yeah,
other countries were recognizing the Philippines' claims.
they were.
This 1875 map, all these treaties.
Right.
It's like a historical treasure hunt uncovering all these documents that support the Philippines.
It really is. It really is quite a fascinating journey through history.
Yeah.
And it highlights, just how strong the Philippines case is. Even when the Philippines lost the island of Palmas case,
Right.
it wasn't because their historical claim was invalid. They
Right.
just hadn't actively demonstrated continuous control over that specific island.
So somebody else had a stronger presence there.
Yeah.
Even though Spain technically discovered it first.
Correct.
But that's not the situation with the Spratlys, right?
Right. The Spratlys were mostly uninhabited
Okay.
and considered pretty inaccessible for a long time. And like we talked about earlier, international law has different rules for those types of territories.
Yeah.
You don't need to constantly occupy them to prove they're yours.
Especially when you've got that awesome map from 1875
Exactly.
that clearly shows they belong to you.
Right.
But let's shift gears a bit.
Okay.
I know that China entered the picture in 1947
Right.
and claimed the Spratlys as their own.
Mm-hmm.
What's their argument based on?
So China leans heavily on something they call historical rights.
Historical rights,
Uh-huh. Okay.
claiming they've always considered the South China Sea,
Okay.
including the Spratlys, as their territory
Right.
since the days of ancient dynasties.
Okay. But what kind of evidence do they have to back that up? Are we
Right.
talking about, like, more old maps?
Well, that's where things get a little murky.
Okay.
They often point to old fishing records
Ah.
and maritime activities,
Right.
suggesting, a long-standing presence in the area.
Yeah. But these claims are often pretty vague,
Hmm.
and they lack the, concrete legal backing that the Philippines has.
So it's more like, we fished here ages ago, so it must be ours.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that really enough?
Not really. No, when you're talking about international law, you need more than just stories and anecdotes.
Right.
You need solid proof.
Right.
Treaties, maps,
Yeah.
official proclamations.
Yeah.
Something concrete.
Right.
And as we've seen, the Philippines has a lot of that.
But hasn't China published maps showing their claims too?
They have, yeah.
I've heard about this 9-line thing.
You're right.
Yeah.
That 9-line map, it basically draws a big loop around most of the South China Sea, claiming it all for China.
Wow.
But here's the thing.
Yeah.
That map has been widely criticized.
Okay.
And it doesn't have any clear historical or legal basis.
And didn't an international tribunal weigh in on that 9-line?
They did.
Yeah.
Back in 2016, a tribunal ruled that China's 9-line claim had no legal standing in international law.
Wow.
They said China couldn't use historical rights to claim areas that are clearly within other countries' exclusive economic zones.
So basically the international community said, nope, that map doesn't fly.
Exactly. That ruling was a huge win for the Philippines.
Okay.
And for international law.
Yeah.
It reaffirmed the importance of sticking to NCLS,
Yeah.
the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea,
Right.
which lays down the rules for, maritime boundaries and rights.
Okay. So it sounds like China tried to bend the rules a bit there.
A little bit.
Speaking of bending the rules, Justice Carpio mentioned some really old Chinese maps.
Mm-hmm.
What's the story with those?
Those old maps are interesting because
Yeah.
they actually work against China's claim.
Oh.
They consistently show that historically, China's southernmost territory was Hainan Island.
Okay.
And that's way north of the Spratlys.
Wait a minute. Are you saying their own historical maps
I am.
contradict their current claims?
Yeah.
That's a bit awkward, isn't it?
It is, isn't it? We're talking about maps spanning centuries from
Wow.
various dynasties,
Yeah.
all showing the same southern boundary.
So they're basically trying to redraw history to fit their current ambitions.
That's one way to look at it.
Yeah.
And it's a good reminder that, we need to be aware of these inconsistencies
Right.
and understand how they're being used to support, modern day claims.
Mhm.
It's not always about what's fair or historically accurate.
Right.
Sometimes it's about power and strategy.
That's a bit cynical, but I guess you're right.
Yeah.
So if I'm getting this straight, it seems like the Philippines has a much stronger case, both historically and legally.
I'd have to agree with you there. They've got a long, well-documented history of claiming these islands,
Mm-hmm.
backed by treaties, official maps,
Yeah.
international legal precedents. And China's claim, while forceful, seems to be built on shakier ground.
They've got these vague historical claims and this controversial map that's been rejected by international courts.
That's a fair assessment. But even though the legal side seems, clear-cut,
Right.
the real-world situation is more complicated.
Yeah.
China is still out there building artificial islands,
Right.
increasing its military presence in the region.
So even though the Philippines has the law on its side, it's facing a powerful opponent that's not backing down.
Unfortunately, that's the reality, and it shows the limitations of international law.
Yeah.
While it provides a framework for resolving disputes,
Right.
it can't always force powerful countries to play by the rules.
Right. It makes you wonder, what happens next? What can the Philippines do?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
At this point, it becomes less about legal battles,
That's-
more about diplomacy, alliances,
Right.
and strategic maneuvering.
Yeah.
It's a complex game with high stakes.
So they say possession is 9/10 of the law.
Right.
And China seems to be playing that game pretty well.
Yeah.
But it makes me think, if this 1875 map is so important
Mm-hmm.
and the Philippines has such a strong legal case,
Yeah.
Why aren't they making a bigger deal about it on the world stage?
That's a great question. Maybe they are, and they're just being strategic about it,
Okay.
holding back their strongest card until the right moment arises.
It's like a secret weapon in their back pocket.
Right.
But wouldn't it be helpful to get more international support
Yeah.
by showing everyone just how solid their claim is?
You would think so, but, international relations can be a tricky game.
Right.
Perhaps they're working behind the scenes,
Okay.
using this map and their historical evidence in, diplomatic negotiations.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So it might not be about shouting it from the rooftops, but about using it strategically to achieve their goals. It's a reminder that there's a lot more going on than what we see in the headlines.
Absolutely. There's always a deeper story. And understanding, the historical and legal complexities is crucial to navigating these international waters.
This whole deep dive has been eye-opening. We started with a seemingly simple question. Which islands belong to the Philippines?
Right.
And we ended up on this fascinating journey through maps and treaties and international law.
And what's really incredible is that we've only scratched the surface.
Yeah.
This 1875 map is just one piece of the puzzle.
Right.
Who knows what other historical treasures are out there, waiting to be discovered.
That's what I find so exciting.
Right.
Imagine all the documents and maps and first-hand accounts
Right.
tucked away in archives around the world,
Yeah.
potentially holding clues to solving these historical mysteries and shaping the future of international relations.
It's a reminder that history is more than just dates and names in a textbook.
Yeah.
It's a living, breathing story that continues to influence our world today.
Well said. I think we've given our listeners plenty to ponder today. Who knew that a single map from the 1800s could have such a huge impact on a modern-day territorial dispute? It really underscores that history matters. And sometimes even the smallest details can have a ripple effect on the world stage.
It's a fascinating case study.
Yeah.
And I hope our listeners come away with, a deeper understanding of how history and law intertwine to shape the geopolitical landscape. And who knows, maybe this deep dive will inspire our listeners to do some digging of their own.
That's right.
There's always more to uncover.
So keep exploring, keep asking questions, and most importantly, keep diving deep.